The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at the tall windows of his private study, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The weight of responsibility had never felt heavier than it did in these quiet moments before dawn. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, entered silently, carrying 2 cups of tea, her movements graceful despite the exhaustion that marked her delicate features. "You couldn't sleep either," she whispered, placing his cup on the mahogany desk that had witnessed countless royal decisions throughout history. William turned to face his wife, seeing in her eyes the same mixture of grief and determination that had been their constant companion for weeks. The palace corridors had grown unusually quiet since the announcement that would change their lives forever. Queen Elizabeth II, the cornerstone of their family and the nation, was spending her final days at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. The woman who had guided William through his darkest hours after his mother's death was now preparing for her own journey's end. Catherine moved to stand beside her husband, her hand finding his with the natural ease that had developed over their 20-year relationship. They had met as university students, young and carefree, never imagining the profound responsibilities that awaited them. Now, as they faced the most significant transition in British royal history in over 70 years, their bond had become their anchor. "The children asked about Gone again this morning," Catherine said softly, using the affectionate name Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had given their great-grandmother. "George wants to know if she'll be able to see his football match next week." William's jaw tightened slightly. At 9 years old, George was beginning to understand the gravity of royal duty, but he was still just a boy who loved his great-grandmother's stories and warm hugs. Charlotte, 7, had inherited her great-grandmother's spirit and determination, while 5-year-old Louis remained blissfully unaware of the seismic shift approaching their family. "We need to prepare them," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But how do you explain to children that the person who has been the constant in everyone's life won't be there anymore?" The couple had spent countless hours in recent weeks traveling between their home in Windsor and Balmoral, where the Queen had chosen to spend her final summer. Each visit brought the reality closer. The monarch, who had reigned for longer than most British citizens had been alive, was gradually saying goodbye to the world she had served with unwavering dedication. Catherine remembered their last meaningful conversation with the Queen. Despite her frailty, Elizabeth's mind remained sharp, her wit intact. She had called them into her sitting room, where afternoon tea was laid out on the familiar china pattern that had graced royal tables for generations. "I want you both to remember," the Queen had said, her voice still carrying the authority that had commanded respect from world leaders for decades, "that duty and love are not opposing forces. They strengthen each other when you let them." Those words had echoed in Catherine's mind every day since. She thought about her own journey from a middle-class girl in Berkshire to becoming the future queen consort. The transformation hadn't always been easy, but Elizabeth had been her guide, teaching her that grace under pressure wasn't just about appearances. It was about finding strength in service to others. William picked up a photograph from his desk, one taken just months earlier during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. 4 generations of royals stood together on the Buckingham Palace balcony, the Queen, radiant despite her age, Charles and Camilla, William and Catherine, and their 3 children waving enthusiastically at the crowds below. It had been a moment of pure joy, a celebration of continuity and tradition. Now that photograph represented something different, a captured moment before everything changed forever. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the morning silence. William and Catherine exchanged glances, both knowing that calls at this hour rarely brought good news. William answered with the formal tone he had perfected over years of official duties. "Sir, it's time." came the gentle but urgent voice of the Queen's private secretary. "Her Majesty is asking for the family." William nodded, though the person on the other end couldn't see him. "We'll leave immediately." As he hung up, Catherine was already moving, her years of royal training taking over. There would be no time for lengthy goodbyes to their children, no opportunity to gradually prepare for what was coming. This was the moment they had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. "I'll call the children's protection officers," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "They can bring the children to Scotland if needed." William watched his wife coordinate the complex logistics that surrounded every royal movement. Her calm efficiency in crisis situations had always amazed him. She had learned to navigate the unique challenges of royal life while maintaining her fundamental warmth and humanity. Within an hour, their convoy was speeding north toward Scotland, past the countryside that had witnessed centuries of British history. In the back seat of their official car, William and Catherine sat in contemplative silence, each lost in their own memories of the remarkable woman they were racing to see one final time. The Scottish Highlands stretched endlessly beyond the car windows as William and Catherine's convoy approached Balmoral Castle. The ancient landscape, painted in shades of purple heather and golden grass, had always been Queen Elizabeth's sanctuary. Here, away from the formal protocols of London, she had found peace in the simplicity of country life, walking her beloved corgis and tending to her horses until her final years. Catherine pressed her hand against the cool glass, watching the familiar landmarks that signaled their approach to the castle. She remembered her first visit to Balmoral as William's girlfriend, nervous about meeting the Queen in her most personal space. Elizabeth had put her at ease immediately, sharing stories about the estate's history while they walked through the gardens together. "Remember when Gangan taught Charlotte to fish in the River Dee?" Catherine asked softly, breaking the heavy silence that had settled between them during the long drive. William smiled despite the circumstances. "Charlotte was so determined to catch something bigger than George had. She stood in that stream for 3 hours completely soaked but wouldn't give up." "Just like her great-grandmother," Catherine replied, "that same stubborn determination to see things through, no matter how difficult." The Queen's strength had been legendary throughout her reign, but it was her personal resilience that had most impressed Catherine. Through scandals, family tragedies, and national crises, Elizabeth had remained steadfast, always putting duty before personal comfort. She had taught Catherine that being royal wasn't about privilege. It was about service, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to something greater than oneself. As they passed through the gates of Balmoral, Catherine noticed the increased security presence and the media vehicles stationed at a respectful distance. The world was watching, waiting for news that would reshape not just Britain but the entire Commonwealth. 54 nations looked to the British monarch as their ceremonial head of state, and Elizabeth's passing would trigger constitutional changes across multiple continents. Inside the castle, the atmosphere was hushed but purposeful. Family members moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency, speaking in low tones as they prepared for the inevitable. Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter, coordinated arrangements with the palace staff. Prince Charles, soon to become King Charles III, spent every possible moment at his mother's bedside. Catherine found herself thinking about her own children, safe at school in Windsor, unaware that history was unfolding around them. How would she explain to them that their Gangan, who had seemed immortal in their young eyes, was leaving them? How could she help them understand that their father would one day wear the crown his grandmother had worn with such dignity? William squeezed her hand as they walked through the familiar halls decorated with tartan patterns and family photographs spanning decades. These walls had witnessed countless family gatherings, Christmas celebrations, and quiet moments away from public scrutiny. Now they would witness the end of an era. In the Queen's private sitting room, the family gathered around Elizabeth's favorite armchair. Despite her physical frailty, her presence still commanded the room. Her eyes, bright and alert, moved from face to face, memorizing each beloved family member one final time. "William, Catherine," she said, her voice barely audible, but filled with warmth. "Come sit with me." They approached carefully, Catherine fighting back tears as she saw how small the Queen looked in the chair that had always seemed to fit her perfectly. Elizabeth reached out with trembling hands, taking one of each of theirs. "You have both exceeded every expectation I had," she whispered. "The way you've modernized the monarchy while respecting its traditions, the way you've raised your children with both humility and pride in their heritage. It gives me great comfort." William leaned closer, his own voice thick with emotion. "Granny, you've been our guiding star through everything. I don't know how to do this without you." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with the hint of humor that had sustained her through decades of public service. "You've been preparing for this your entire life, my dear boy. Trust your instincts, trust your wife, and remember that the crown serves the people, not the other way around." She turned to Catherine with a gentle smile. "My dear, you've brought such joy to this family. Your children are fortunate to have you as their mother, and the nation will be blessed to have you as their queen." The weight of those words settled over Catherine like a heavy cloak. Queen Catherine. The title still felt surreal, even after years of preparation. She thought about all the women who had held that position before her, some beloved, others controversial, all carrying the enormous responsibility of representing their nation's values and aspirations. "I promise we'll honor everything you've built," Catherine whispered. "We'll protect the institution while helping it grow and change with the times." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Change is not the enemy of tradition. Stagnation is. Keep the monarchy relevant, keep it connected to ordinary people's lives, and it will endure for generations to come." As afternoon faded into evening, the family took turns sitting with the Queen, sharing memories and receiving her final words of guidance. Each conversation was precious, unrepeatable, and heartbreaking. Charles spoke with his mother about the weight of kingship he was about to inherit. Anne received blessing for her tireless work on behalf of numerous charities. The younger royals, including William's cousins Peter and Zara, found comfort in their grandmother's familiar presence, even as they said goodbye. Catherine stepped onto the castle's terrace as the Scottish sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The beauty of the moment felt almost inappropriate given the gravity of what was happening inside, but she knew the Queen would have appreciated it. Elizabeth had always found solace in nature's rhythms, understanding that beauty and sorrow could coexist. William joined her, slipping his arm around her shoulders as they watched the light fade over the mountains. Tomorrow, their lives would be fundamentally different. He would be heir to the throne, she would be the future queen consort, and their children would move one step closer to their own destinies within the royal family. "Are you ready for this?" William asked quietly. Catherine considered the question seriously. Was anyone ever truly ready to assume such enormous responsibility? To know that every word, every action, every decision would be scrutinized by millions of people around the world? "No," she answered honestly. "But we'll figure it out together, just like we always have." The ancient clock in the Balmoral hallway chimed softly at 6:30 in the evening. Queen Elizabeth II, at 96 years old, drew her final breath surrounded by the family she had devoted her life to protecting and guiding. The woman who had promised on her 21st birthday to serve the Commonwealth for her whole life had fulfilled that vow with extraordinary grace and dedication. William felt the world shift beneath his feet as the doctor quietly confirmed what everyone in the room already knew. His grandmother, the constant presence who had shaped his understanding of duty and service, was gone. Catherine's hand found his immediately, their fingers interlocking as they processed the magnitude of the moment together. King Charles III, as he was now known, stood silently beside his mother's chair, his face etched with grief and the overwhelming weight of his new responsibilities. At 73, he had waited longer than any heir in British history to assume the throne. Now, in this moment of profound loss, he also faced the challenge of leading a nation and commonwealth through their own period of mourning. Catherine watched her father-in-law with deep respect and sympathy. She understood, perhaps better than anyone except William, the impossible balance between personal grief and public duty that defined royal life. There would be time for private tears later, but now the machinery of constitutional monarchy had to move forward with precision and dignity. The next few hours passed in a carefully choreographed sequence that had been planned for decades. Operation London Bridge, the code name for the protocols following the Queen's death, began immediately. Secure phone calls were made to the Prime Minister, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and other senior officials. The Commonwealth nations were notified through diplomatic channels, ensuring that the news reached government leaders before it became public. William and Catherine found themselves in the unique position of supporting both Charles in his new role as king and each other as they processed their own grief. The Queen had been more than a sovereign to them. She had been a grandmother, mentor, and friend. Her absence would leave a void that could never be filled. As night fell over Scotland, the family gathered once more in the Queen's sitting room, now forever changed by her absence. Charles spoke quietly about the funeral arrangements and the period of national mourning that would follow. There were countless decisions to be made, traditions to honor, and a grieving nation to comfort. She always said that grief shared is grief diminished, William said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. She would want us to remember that the love we shared with her doesn't end today. It transforms into something that guides us forward. Catherine nodded, thinking about their children back in Windsor. They would need to return immediately to be with George, Charlotte, and Louis. The children would need their parents' strength and comfort as they tried to understand that their beloved Gan was no longer with them. The drive back to Windsor took place through the night, past sleeping villages and empty motorways. Catherine and William sat in contemplative silence, each processing the day's events in their own way. The woman who had been the anchor of their family and their nation for 7 decades was gone, but her legacy would endure through the institutions she had strengthened and the family she had raised. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle, they arrived home to find their children already awake, somehow sensing that something significant had changed in their world. 9-year-old George met them at the door with unusual seriousness, his young face reflecting a maturity beyond his years. "Mama, Papa, is Gan in heaven now?" he asked quietly. Catherine knelt down to her son's level, gathering all 3 children close to her. "Yes, darling. Gan lived a very long, very full life, and she loved all of us very much. She's not hurting anymore, and she's at peace." Charlotte, ever the pragmatist like her great-grandmother, asked, "Will Papa be king now?" William joined his family on the floor, something he never would have done during formal occasions but which felt completely natural in this moment of raw honesty. "Grandpa Charles is king now," he explained gently. "And someday, when I'm much older, I'll be king too. But that's a long time away, and we don't need to think about that now." Louis, still too young to fully grasp the concept of death, simply wanted to know if they could still visit the castle where Gan lived. The innocence of his question brought tears to Catherine's eyes, but she promised that they would continue visiting Balmoral and keeping alive all the wonderful memories they had made there. Over the following days, as Britain entered its official period of mourning, William and Catherine found themselves balancing their roles as grieving family members and public figures. They attended meetings about the funeral arrangements, received condolences from world leaders, and helped coordinate the complex logistics of what would become one of the most watched events in history. The Queen's death dominated global news coverage, with tributes pouring in from every corner of the world. Presidents, prime ministers, and ordinary citizens shared memories of meeting Elizabeth or expressed gratitude for her decades of service. The outpouring of love and respect provided some comfort to the grieving family, confirming that their private loss was shared by millions. Catherine found herself reflecting on the conversation she'd had with the Queen just weeks earlier about duty and love strengthening each other. As she watched William support his father while managing his own grief, she saw those words taking on profound meaning. Their love for the Queen and for their family was motivating them to serve others, even in their darkest moments. The funeral, held at Westminster Abbey 10 days later, brought together world leaders and ordinary citizens in a shared expression of respect and gratitude. Catherine and William walked behind the Queen's coffin with their children, their faces composed despite the emotional turmoil within. The ceremony was a masterpiece of pageantry and tradition, exactly as Elizabeth would have wanted. As the coffin was lowered into the royal vault at St. George's Chapel, Catherine felt the weight of history and the promise of the future converging. The Queen was gone, but the monarchy she had modernized and strengthened would continue. William would one day wear the crown with the same dignity his grandmother had shown, and Catherine would stand beside him as Queen Consort, serving the nation with the grace and dedication Elizabeth had exemplified. Walking back to Windsor Castle after the funeral, hand in hand with her husband and surrounded by their children, Catherine understood that their quiet farewell at Balmoral had indeed etched an eternal chapter into royal history. The love, respect, and lessons they had shared with the Queen would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead, ensuring that Elizabeth's remarkable legacy would endure for generations to come.